In an era of heightened global economic interdependence, the United States, under the leadership of President Donald Trump, has once again stirred international debate with its bold imposition of tariffs on goods from countries across the globe. Captures a snapshot of this moment, highlighting the world's curiosity and concern about America's economic strategy, particularly its reliance on tariffs as a tool to reshape global trade dynamics. This points to Trump's background as a real estate mogul, noting that many of his buildings rely on Canadian steel, and questions the efficacy of tariffs, especially when directed at economic powerhouses like China, a country that dominates manufacturing in sectors ranging from clothing to artificial intelligence. This shows that the world's dependence on China's manufacturing prowess surpasses its reliance on the United States, which serves primarily as a market and a currency hub. This video expands on these ideas, delving into the implications of U.S. tariffs, the strategic motivations behind them, and their potential to reshape global economic relationships. It examines the interplay between the United States, China, and other key players like Canada, while critically assessing whether tariffs can achieve their intended goals in a world where economic power is increasingly distributed. Donald Trump's presidency, both in his first term, 2017 to 2021, and his return to office in 2025, has been marked by a protectionist economic agenda. Tariffs, taxes imposed on imported goods, have been a cornerstone of this strategy, aimed at protecting domestic industries, reducing trade deficits, and bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States. This references wild tariffs on the whole world, suggesting a broad and aggressive approach to trade policy. During Trump's first term, tariffs were imposed on a range of goods, including steel and aluminum from Canada, Mexico, and the European Union, as well as significant duties on Chinese products. These measures were justified under the guise of national security and economic fairness, with Trump arguing that foreign countries had taken advantage of the U.S. through unfair trade practices. The reintroduction of tariffs in 2025, as it surfaces, appears to follow a similar playbook. However, the global economic landscape has evolved since Trump's first term. Supply chain disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, geopolitical tensions, and the rapid advancement of technologies like AI have reshaped trade priorities. The data's mention of Canadian steel in Trump's buildings underscores a critical irony. Even a president championing America First policies relies on foreign materials for his business empire. This raises questions about the feasibility of decoupling from global supply chains and the potential repercussions of tariffs on industries that depend on imported goods. It emphasizes China's dominance in global manufacturing, describing it as the country that produces clothes, the country that produces computers. China has solidified its position as the world's manufacturing hub, accounting for approximately 30% of global manufacturing output, according to the United Nations. From textiles to electronics, China's industrial capacity is unmatched, driven by a combination of low labor costs, massive infrastructure investments, and government support. In the technology sector, China's influence is particularly pronounced. The country produces a significant share of the world's smartphones, computers, and semiconductors, while also leading in the development and deployment of AI technologies. Companies like Huawei, Tencent, and ByteDance have become global players, challenging Western dominance in tech innovation. The assertion that the world needs China more than America reflects a growing sentiment in some quarters that China's role as a supplier of essential goods and technologies outweighs the United States' influence as a consumer market and financial center. However, this perspective oversimplifies the economic relationship between the two countries. The United States remains the world's largest consumer market, with a GDP of over $25 trillion and a population with significant purchasing power. China's export-driven economy relies heavily on access to this market, with the U.S. accounting for approximately 17% of China's total exports in 2024. The U.S. dollar's status as the world's reserve currency further amplifies America's economic leverage, enabling it to impose sanctions, control financial flows, and influence global trade. Tariffs are a blunt instrument in economic policy, capable of both protecting domestic industries and triggering unintended consequences. This arises questions whether Trump's tariffs will work, particularly in the context of targeting China. To evaluate this, we must consider the objectives of tariffs and their historical outcomes. Trump's tariffs are designed to achieve several goals. 1. Protecting domestic industries. By increasing the cost of imported goods, tariffs aim to make American-made products more competitive. For example, tariffs on Chinese electronics could incentivize U.S. companies to manufacture domestically. 2. Reducing trade deficits. The U.S. trade deficit with China, which stood at $419 billion in 2018, has been a focal point of Trump's rhetoric. Tariffs seek to reduce this imbalance by discouraging imports. 3. Reshoring manufacturing. By making foreign goods more expensive, tariffs encourage companies to relocate production to the U.S., creating jobs and boosting local economies. 4th, geopolitical leverage. Tariffs can be used as a negotiating tool to extract concessions from trading partners, such as better market access or intellectual property protections. Historical outcomes. During Trump's first term, tariffs had mixed results. The 25% tariffs on steel and 10% tariffs on aluminum imposed in 2018 succeeded in boosting U.S. steel production, with companies like Nucor reporting increased revenues. However, these tariffs also raised costs for downstream industries, such as automotive and construction, which rely on imported steel. The Economic Policy Institute estimated that the steel tariffs created 8,700 jobs in the U.S. steel industry, but led to job losses in other sectors due to higher input costs. The U.S.-China trade war, which saw tariffs on over $360 billion of Chinese goods, similarly produced mixed outcomes. While the trade deficit with China decreased slightly, global supply chains were disrupted, and American consumers faced higher prices for goods ranging from electronics to clothing. China retaliated with tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, devastating American farmers, particularly in the Midwest. The Phase 1 trade deal signed in 2020 aimed to ease tensions, but many tariffs remained in place, and China fell short of its commitments to purchase additional U.S. goods. This reference to wild tariffs suggests a continuation or escalation of this approach in 2025. However, the global economy is now more fragmented, with countries pursuing greater self-sufficiency in response to supply chain vulnerabilities exposed by the pandemic. Tariffs on Chinese goods could accelerate this trend, prompting countries to diversify their supply chains away from both China and the U.S. For example, India and Vietnam have emerged as alternative manufacturing hubs, attracting investment from companies seeking to hedge against U.S.-China trade tensions. Moreover, tariffs on China could exacerbate inflationary pressures in the U.S. The Federal Reserve has already grappled with inflation in recent years, and higher import costs could further strain American consumers. Tariffs on allies like Canada could strain diplomatic relations and disrupt integrated supply chains, particularly in industries like construction, where Trump's own buildings rely on Canadian materials. This shows that most of Trump's buildings are built on the steel of the Canadian manufactured company, underscores the deep economic ties between the U.S. and Canada. The two countries share one of the world's largest bilateral trade relationships, with over $1.2 trillion in goods and services exchanged annually. Canada supplies approximately 20% of U.S. steel imports, making it a critical partner in industries like construction and manufacturing. During Trump's first term, tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum were met with swift retaliation, with Canada imposing duties on U.S. exports like whiskey, maple syrup, and motorcycles. The tariffs were eventually lifted as part of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, but the episode highlighted the risks of targeting allies with protectionist measures. If Trump reimposes tariffs on Canadian steel in 2025, as the script implies, it could raise costs for U.S. construction firms, including those associated with Trump's real estate ventures. This would undermine the very economic nationalism the tariffs are meant to promote. Furthermore, Canada's role in the U.S. supply chain extends beyond steel. The country is a major supplier of energy, auto parts, and agricultural products. Disrupting this relationship could have ripple effects across the U.S. economy, particularly in border states like Michigan and New York. The call for Trump to think again about tariffs resonates here, as targeting Canada could alienate a key partner while failing to address the broader challenge of competing with China.